Hello everyone, I was in class the other day with my adult education groups, and one of the students came up to me after class and they asked me, what would you buy? They wanted a recommendation. They were looking at doing a wide variety of photography and they wanted to start getting into a little bit more video. Their search came down to, for whatever reason, the Fuji X-T4 and the Sony A7iv, right? The newly released Sony. And they knew that I had both those cameras. And so they sat down and said, what should I do? What do I buy here? And so that's what this video is about. I want to go through my experiences with both cameras so far, and I'll tell you what I recommended for him, and I'll also tell you at the end of the video what I would choose if I only could keep one camera out of the two. I really think this is a good topic for a video because both cameras are marketed kind of as hybrid cameras. They even have a hybrid switch on them, right? They can go from stills to video. Both cameras keep their settings. If you're on stills and you switch to video, you get a wide variety of differences in settings, which is really cool and very useful for people like me and many others who are not like super professionals, but who want to get great quality out of both video and stills and quickly navigate between two. The Fuji X-T4, the Sony A74, they make it really easy. And so I think this is a good comparison. The first thing to look at is probably price. And I just go with price because it is important. I work at a camera store. I work with students in classrooms, adult education classrooms for photography, and price matters quite a bit. You know, I'll recommend something to somebody and they'll be like, heck no, I don't have that money. And I get it. Most people, 99% of the people out there are not like true professional photographers. Like me, I'm not a true professional photographer. I'm not out there shooting sports every day, for instance, and trying to make an entire living shooting sports photography like there are other people out there doing. Price matters to most of us. In the case of the X-T4 versus the A74, it's like an $800 difference. So the Sony is $2,500 and the Fuji is $1,700. And the Fuji has more used options available. You can find a lot of Fujis out there, the X-T4s, for $200, $300, $400 less, depending on your willingness to risk getting a used camera. I think that's a significant difference between the two camera systems. When I asked that student in class, hey, does price matter to you? He didn't think $1,000 either way was that big of a difference. He just wanted to get the right camera for him. So if $800 is a big difference, and some of the other, we're going to talk a little bit more about price when you come to lenses a little bit. If that matters to you, then it's a pretty easy recommendation to recommend the X-T4, which could do a lot of good things, and we'll talk about that later on. But an $800 difference in my book is a pretty significant chunk. It's a pretty big difference. The second thing that I look at and talk about when I'm thinking about camera systems are the lens options available. Fuji and Sony, it's vastly different landscape. So with Fuji, you're getting really good lenses, some really high quality lenses, but you have many, many less options. So we have a wide range. Fuji offers a lot, and some of their lenses are absolutely incredible, world-class, some of the best lenses you could possibly buy. There's no doubt. But there are not nearly as many options as you can get from Sony, which also has full support from Sigma and Tamron. Now, you can get stuff like Viltrox and some of those other fringe-ish third-party lenses. You can use adapters to use other. We're not going to talk about that. That's something that this person wasn't interested in at all, that I'm not really interested in. We're talking about lenses you can go to a camera store, quickly and easily buy, and put on your camera. The next thing is ergonomics, size, and weight. I really think all three of those things matter a lot. They matter a ton to me. One of the reasons that I switched from full frame Canon back in the day to Fuji completely, I sold almost everything with Canon. I still have like one lens somewhere that I don't know why I have it. But one of the reasons I switched was because of the size difference. There was a massive size difference going from full frame Canon at the time, DSLRs, to Fuji. And I was very happy to make that trade-off, even though I wasn't always getting as good high ISO performance, and there were a couple other things that maybe I missed a little bit. I'd trade them really easily for the size and weight and the ergonomics of the Fuji stuff. Now, the difference is getting less and less, especially when you look at the A74 and the X-T4. So the size difference is very, very small. They look around the same. They feel around the same. Honestly, holding them without lenses on them, they're very, 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 very close in size and weight. The ergonomics, I'm not going to speak too much about. I think that ergonomics is so personal that it's not something to consider. For instance, I can't hold for very long Canon cameras. The new R6 and R5 don't feel very good in my hand. The Nikons feel like the best thing ever. That's completely subjective. That's up to you to decide. But the size of weight ratio is not that big of a difference anymore. So including lenses sometimes, the X-T4 with the 50-140, for instance, compared to the A74 with the new 70-200, 2.8, comparable focal lengths and everything like that, you know, comparable performance, that 50-140 on Fuji is pretty awesome. The weight difference is only 100 grams, which is pretty much nothing, honestly. That is not as big of a difference as the APS-C people will tell you that it is. You know, there are some other differences. You can get those amazing Fujicrons, the 23, 35, and 50 2.0s for Fuji that are a lot of fun to use and high quality and really tiny. The Fuji stuff is a little bit smaller and lighter, but it's not across the board, not at all, especially when you take into consideration the X-T4 versus the A74. The fourth aspect that matters to me and that I recommend and talk about to other people is image quality and video. For this person that was asking me this specific question, he was asking me about the hybrid nature of the two cameras. So video was important a little bit. Not super important. He wasn't going to be doing professional work, but similar to what I kind of use my camera as. And so image quality and video, again, I think the difference is pretty close. So we're talking about full frame versus APS-C. And I honestly, truly do not see a drastic difference. Other people will argue with me. They'll be like, hey, full frame blows APS-C out of the water. And that's fine. You can argue and you could show me charts and you could show me, you know, anything you want. But in my general day-to-day use of almost everything, they're very, very close. You do get a little bit more shallow depth of field with full frame, right? So the A74, all things being equal, gets you less depth of field. So you can blur things just a little bit more. But I think there's trade-offs there. I think you can get great looking depth of field. I have never had a problem with that. And so I don't think it's that big of a deal, the full frame versus APS-C. And even high ISO on Fuji looks pretty good to me. I think the A74 is probably a little bit better. But in day-to-day, everyday use, and even like some tough situations, systems are comparable. I think they do a really good job, even though there's probably just a slight edge because you get more megapixels from the A74. You know, that's nice to have. You can crop a little bit and be able to have a little bit more resolution. So I think that the edge goes to the A74 on something like this, but they're so close that it doesn't truly totally gonna sway the recommendation. I think video is also very close. You get a pretty extreme crop factor when you're doing 4K 60 on the A74 that we didn't really expect. But we also get that with the X-T4, right? We get the natural crop factor of APS-C using the same kinds of lenses. So for me, that wasn't that big of a deal at all, even though a lot of people complained when Fuji or Sony came out and talked about the crop on the 4K 60. One thing that I love about the Fuji system is the colors, and Sony colors are fine. They're good and nice. The JPEGs look fine. The raw files are really malleable. But there's something there with the X-T4 as far as color goes and the ability to have a lot of fun with color. But that's not really super important to a lot of people. It wasn't important to the guy that I was talking to. He's like, I'll never do that. I'll just shoot in RAW and never mess with the color simulations or anything like that. The JPEG recipes. And so that really, the mileage on something like that varies. And color is so subjective, just like ergonomics and size and weight. You know, color really is up to you. And if you love the Fuji colors, get a Fuji camera. If you don't care that much, then almost any camera is going to be okay for you as far as color goes. The last major point that I look at when I'm recommending cameras and talking to people about cameras and talking to this specific person about the differences with the X-T4 and the A74 is autofocus. And this is the big one for me. This is the really big one. The X-T4 in most situations does a really good job. When I go and I do portrait sessions, I'm used to the old Canon technology. Like I was nailing focus on the Canon 5D, the original, way back in the day, and the Canon 5D Mark II. I didn't really have too much of a problem with autofocus then, and I have less of a problem, way less of a problem with the X-T4. I'm getting really good results in those types of situations. I think for wedding photography, the X-T4 is really, really nice and really good. But when situations get tough, when things get darker, the backgrounds become more complicated, when you introduce a lot of stuff between the camera and what you're trying to take a picture of, that's when the X-T4 and the Fuji system in general struggles. When you're looking at sports photography and birding and really fast moving wildlife, all those things, the Fuji system just struggles. Now, I know there are some people probably watching this, and there's people out there who get great results with the Fuji system shooting all of that stuff. And that's great. I know a professional sports photographer who shot Fuji for quite a few years, professional quality, high quality sports. They just switched to Sony, by the way, as a side note. They got sick of working so hard to nail their shots. The reason I bought the Sony A7 IV was mostly for video autofocus. And, you know, I found too many times with the X-T4, I would go out into the field and I would do video and it would lock on focus like fine and do well. And then suddenly just like lose its brain and start focusing on something behind me and then come back to me. It got really distracting. I also recently went out on a photo shoot with a former student of mine. Back, I had him 10 years ago. And him and I went on a portrait shoot. And I gave him, we alternated between the Sony A7 IV and the X-T4. So he used it and then I used it back and forth. When he used the Sony A7 IV and he put on portrait, eye autofocus, every shot was just nailed. I mean, every single shot that he took just by releasing the shutter was in focus, and it was great. Pretty much, there was a few misses, but that's to be expected in any situation. But almost every shot, when he used the X-T4 with the eye focus and everything, he had so many more misses. It got bad to one point where the light was getting dim, the sun was going down, and there was a lot of interference. There was not interference. There was a lot of stuff behind the subject matters. And he was losing focus quite a bit, and he was getting frustrated. So I handed him the Sony A7 IV, and he got almost every shot in focus. That is one of those differences. And some people might say, hey, you know what? That's just user error. He needs to have more time with it. But in my experience as well, taking the A7 IV to my son's dojo, for instance, and that's a dark situation. I'm using, higher ISO and everything like that. It's a tougher situation. The A7 IV simply does better. It locks focus. I'm more confident with it. And anybody who is a birder or shooting sports, the A7 IV or the Sony system in general, even Canon, the new Canons, are going to do a much better job than the Fuji. There's a reason why most people in the professional birding and wildlife and sports photography world don't use Fuji. And the Fuji autofocus just can't keep up in difficult situations like the Sony. So in this instance, the X-T4 does not give me as much confidence as the Sony A7 IV. So finally, what was my recommendation to that student? What about me? What would I keep if I only had to choose one system? I just want to say a couple things. For the price, the Fuji X-T4 is an incredible piece of technology. It is truly incredible. It came out a while ago. The A7 IV just came out, right? And the X-T4 is able to keep up with the A7 IV in many, many regards. And you're saving a lot of money, quite a bit of money shooting with the Fuji. For instance, earlier when I was talking about the differences between the size and weight differences between the X-T4 with the 50 to 140 and the A7 IV with the 70 to 200, I was saying that there was a very minimal difference in weight, right? The new 70 to 200 from Sony, not the old heavy one. But there's not a small amount of difference in price. Those two combinations, those two cameras, there's almost a $2,000 difference in price when you put the 70-200 Sony onto the A7 IV versus the 50 to 140 on the X-T4. And the 50 to 140 on the X-T4 is a really, really high performer. It is one of the top 2 or 3 lenses, I think, in the Fuji system that has really excellent, very nicely done autofocus with the X-T4. It's much faster than most lenses. And so is that worth $2,000? And for most people, it just can't be, right? That difference probably isn't worth $2,000 unless they are shooting high-end stuff that's really, really fast, and they absolutely have to have that. So for the price difference, the X-T4 is easy to recommend to so many people if they're looking at those two camera systems, in my opinion. Now, I recommended to this person to get the Sony, and the reason it's because he really wants to get more into birding. And for birds, holy cow, they're just so fast and they're moving around. And you need something that's going to be accurate. You could switch the Sony A7 IV to bird mode on autofocus and have incredible results, even when there's stuff in between you and the bird, which is something that struggles, the Fuji struggles quite a bit with. Now, for me, if I'm only going to have to pick one, luckily I didn't have to make that choice. The A7 IV I bought for my business. I have a business account. It was something that I could justify because of that. It didn't come, I'm not using that money to pay for bills or the house or food or anything like that. So for me, it was a pretty easy decision. But let's say all that goes away and I have to pick one camera to keep because I have to get rid of the other ones. Honestly, I'm going to keep the X-T4. And the reason is just because I really love using the Fuji camera. I pick it up most times. Like if I'm going to go and get something, go on an enjoyable photo trip, I'm just going to have fun with. The Fuji with one of those primes is such a great feeling camera. It gives me incredible results. I enjoy using the Fuji JPEG simulations and the built-in ability to adjust your color on the JPEGs quite a bit. All those things matter to me. And the video performance is very good. And the autofocus performance is good enough. I would just deal with some of the in and out of focus things, right? I would just be like, hey, I'm going to deal with that. Not to say that I don't love the A7 IV. The Sony is really, really awesome. It makes me smile when I go out and I take a picture of a bird or my son running around and it's in focus. And every time it's like really in focus. I love that. But I can get really good results with the X-T4. And for the price difference, for my personal use, I am totally fine with the X-T4. So that would be what I would choose if I had to pick just one. I really think for most users, the camera that feels the best for you, the camera that's going to make you happier in your hands and make you go out and shoot more and get you the results of what you want, I think that that's the camera for you. Whether that's a Canon entry-level T7 or whether it is a Sony A7 IV or a Fuji X100V, the camera that you're going to be able to take out and shoot a lot with and have fun doing it is going to be the one that's the best one for you. Now, if you're a professional and you have professional usage, for instance, I know a buddy that just has to get high resolution landscapes. He's going to choose medium format, or he's going to choose something like the A7R4 with 60 megapixels, right? Those are specific uses. If somebody needs tilt shift lenses, they're going to use another system most likely. There's, different reasons to buy different cameras, of course. And if you know what those reasons are, you could probably find a system for you. But for most of us, these cameras are all incredible. And it's all about having fun and doing good work most of the time and enjoying it. Most of us should try to enjoy photography more and not get too worked up on the details. But I hope you enjoyed. If you have any comments, throw them below. Don't get too crazy. Don't be mean. Don't be mean to other people if they recommend a different camera or anything like that. We're all going to have a happy video comment system here on my channel. And hope you enjoyed. We'll talk to you later.